last lecture of this semester, or last set of lectures, I should say, in this new format. So let's go ahead and finish up the major parts of the nervous system. And then in the fall, we'll come back with the special senses and continue from there. All right, we're at chapter 14, which is the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has motor neurons that are going to smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. They are there to make adjustments, ensure optimal support for body activities. So the autonomic nervous system has to be able to turn things up and turn things down as necessary. It will do things like shunt blood to areas that need it, adjust heart rate, blood pressure, control digestive processes. And it works through subconscious control. It is not voluntary. We don't have conscious control over it. We can affect it with cortical systems in our brain, but it is really the involuntary nervous system, also the general visceral motor system. So we said before, the nervous system itself is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system was the brain and sensory, bringing information to the central nervous system, or motor, carrying information away from the central nervous system. And that motor division was divided into two parts as well. The somatic nervous system, which we had conscious control over, only required us to fire the nerves if we want to contract a skeletal muscle. And now we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has a sympathetic division and a parasympathetic division, because the things we control with the autonomic nervous systems are just not on and off. Sometimes we want to turn up the amount of activity in organs or organ systems, and sometimes we need to turn down the amount of activity in organs and organ systems. So the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system are similar in that they both have motor fibers, but the motor fibers have different effectors. The somatic went to skeletal muscle. We just discussed a little bit about what the autonomic does. They have different pathways in which they get to their target organs, and their target organs will still respond to neurotransmitters, but we're not dealing with a single neurotransmitter. It's not just acetylcholine, and in fact, even when it is acetylcholine, it will depend more on the acetylcholine receptor than acetylcholine. So somatic nervous system innervates skeletal muscle, and the autonomic nervous system goes to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. The efferent pathways in the ganglia. In the somatic nervous system, we had a cell body within the central nervous system, a single thick myelinated group A axon extended in either spinal or cranial nerves and synapsed with the skeletal muscle it was controlling. The autonomic nervous system is going to use a 2-neuron chain. So that place where those two neurons come together is called a ganglion. So we have a preganglionic neuron. That's a cell body is within the central nervous system, but it uses a thin, lightly myelinated preganglionic axon, which extends to that ganglia. And that ganglia connects with the postganglionic neuron, which is in the ganglia, but outside the central nervous system. Its cell body will synapse with the preganglionic and the autonomic ganglia with non-myelinated postganglionic axons that extend to the effector organ. The somatic nervous system used acetylcholine. The effect of acetylcholine on skeletal muscle is always excitatory, always stimulatory, cause the muscle to contract. In the autonomic nervous system, all of the preganglionic fibers, all the ones that originate in the central nervous system, use acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter. Postganglionic fibers can use either norepinephrine or acetylcholine when they are talking to their effector organs. Another difference is, though, that those norepinephrine and acetylcholine, even acetylcholine, can have either stimulatory or inhibitory effects on the target organ, and that depends on the type of receptor for that particular neurotransmitter. The higher brain centers can regulate both systems. Most spinal and cranial nerves have both somatic and autonomic fibers. Adaptation usually involves both skeletal muscle and visceral organs, so active muscles require more oxygen and glucose, so the autonomic nervous system speeds up heart rate and opens the airways in response to that. So in the somatic nervous system, we have a neuron in the central nervous system, a myelinated axon that released acetylcholine to a neuromuscular junction, causing a muscle to contract. In the autonomic nervous system, we still have a cell body within the central nervous system. It is going to be a lightly myelinated axon, and it is going to talk to a second neuron, which is in the periphery. And it will use either acetylcholine, and that second neuron will use either acetylcholine or norepinephrine as its neurotransmitter. And you also notice here there's a little bit of difference between where that second neuron is. Some ganglia are closer to the central nervous system, and some ganglia are further away from the central nervous system. We'll talk about that again later on. Whoops. So the parasympathetic division promotes the maintenance function, conserves energy. The sympathetic division mobilizes the body during activities. Most visceral organs are served by both divisions, and they are having opposite effects. And that dynamic antagonism between those divisions helps maintain homeostasis. It's again an extension of our teeter-totter that allows us to with the negative feedback, allows us to very tightly regulate stuff. So the parasympathetic division uses energy as little as possible, even while carrying out its maintenance activities. When you think of parasympathetic division, think of digestion, diuresis, defecation. It's the rest and digest system. So if a person is relaxing and reading after a meal, their blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rates are low. Their gastrointestinal activity is high. Pupils tend to be constricted. We need less accommodation for close vision. We'll talk about accommodation reflexes when we get to the special senses. Whereas the sympathetic division is going to mobilize our body during activity. This is the fight or flight system. You could think of exercise, excitement, emergency, embarrassment. Those are the things that activate the sympathetic system. They're going to do things like increase heart rate, dry mouth, cold, sweaty skin, dilated pupils. During vigorous physical activity, the sympathetic division will shunt blood to the skeletal muscles and heart, dilate bronchioles so we can get more air in, and it will cause the liver to release glucose to provide more energy. Anatomical differences. There's three main differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic division as far as anatomy goes. The sites of origin I touched on before. Parasympathetic fibers are craniosacral. They originate in the brain and the sacral areas of the spinal cord, whereas sympathetic fibers are thoracolumnar. They originate in the thorax and the lumbar regions of the spinal cord. The relative lengths of the fibers, this is actually what I was referring to in that image. The parasympathetic has a long preganglionic and short postganglionic fibers, so the ganglia are close to the target organ. Sympathetic has short preganglionic fibers and long postganglionic fibers, so the ganglia are closer to the central nervous system. So the parasympathetic ganglia are located in or near the visceral or effector organ, while the sympathetic ganglia are close to the spinal cord. And that is shown here. And I would refer you to Table 14.1 in your textbook to go over this and summarize what I just went through. And I am going to pause there, and we'll pick up the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions in the next set of lectures.